you again for coming in this morning. I really appreciate it. One of the things that I feel is important for the college in general is to understand the problems that we're facing as an institution from a common perspective. And understand the problems. Part of it is just educating yourself about what's going on in our community. And so what today's presentation is, I'm going to talk a little bit about the college's enrollment situation. As you know, we are facing steadily declining enrollments. And we're reaching a critical point where we have to turn this around or where we're going to really be in some major trouble. We're also facing some financial issues. Financial position is declining rapidly. We have a situation where our money can potentially run out in a couple of years. And so now is the time to act. And to be successful, we have to have the whole organization working together, understanding the problem and working to solve them. And so today is just an opportunity for you to kind of understand where we're at and maybe start thinking about ways in which we can turn this organization around. So that's kind of the framework in which we're approaching this. I don't want you to, feel like this is a dire situation or, it's life-threatening or anything at this point. It's not. There's still things that we can do, but right now let's just understand what's going on from a kind of a data-driven perspective. Okay, not just, there's a lot of passion around this, but there's some data that needs to go into our thinking. So one of the things that I want to kind of start on is the population. What's everybody think about the population? Everybody knows the population of the 5 counties that we serve is declining. When I was preparing for this job way back in June, May, June, and so I did a lot of research to kind of see what was potentially available to us to turn around some of the questions that I knew they would ask. I knew they would ask about enrollment. I knew they would ask about finance and things like that. So I started by going to the Census Bureau and looking at external data. And here, what does those charts show you? What does it say? What conclusions can you draw from that chart about our population?
It's decreasing.
Every county is decreasing, absolutely. Now, if you were to add up all of those numbers, what you would see is in 2010, we had about 60,000 residents in the 5-county service area. In 2019, the census estimated that we have about 53,000 residents in the 5-county area. Anybody good with math? You know what kind of decline we're looking at? It's about 10% of a decline. So we've lost about 10% of the people that used to live here. Those are 10% of the people that could have been students. Okay, so that 10% number is kind of something I want to just stick in your mind temporarily. So as it relates to population, this isn't really news, but now you know the extent of the decline. We'll know a little bit more accurately here in a couple of months when the Census Bureau publishes its final 2020 numbers. But my expectation is that it will probably be less than 53,000. All right, so how does that, I started thinking then, if the population's declining, what's our K12 enrollment look like? What is our available high school student population? Students who could be our traditional students, who we always think about, because when you start thinking about enrollment and you start thinking about recruitment, what's the first thing we say? What are we doing with the high schools? What are our counselors doing? Whose fault is this? Is this the admissions department? Is it faculty? So what's going on in the K12 environment? So what I did is I went out to the Illinois Board of Higher Education, who's kind of the boss of the K12s in the state, and they have enrollment data that they publish every year. And this enrollment data, they have what they call front count days, and so this is how the K12s get paid. And so this is a pretty accurate description of how many students are in the K12 environment. There are 19 school districts that we serve. 12 of them are high school districts, and the other ones are your grade school districts. So I looked at how many students in 2019, or last year, were in grades kindergarten, pre-K actually, pre-K through 12th grade. Added all of those up, and then I totaled, and these are the total number of students in our K-12 systems. Kind of makes sense, right? What does that chart show you there?
Probably more than a 10% decline.
It absolutely is more than a 10% decline. So there's some things that I really want you to be aware of. This is more of a, this starts from fiscal year 2003, so all the way back to 2002, 2003. I'm trying to get to a 20-year view. But what you see in 2003 is 10,600. We've lost all the way down to 8,400. That's almost 2,000 students, which is almost a 20% decline. And you can do the math, it's actually probably a little higher than that. The other thing that we're doing is I was trying to look at this from a statistical perspective, because this tells a history of enrollment. And as much as history can predict future, it has limitations. You know what I mean? But what is this red line here? This is a statistical kind of a figure in which we look at this number here, R squared value. And this R squared value talks about the strength of this trend, and talks about, it implies the likelihood that it might continue. The closer this R squared value is to 1, the more intense the trend, which means it's more likely to continue. The less, the closer it is to 0, then it just varies back and forth, and you'll see that line actually flatten out. So that's just a quick history or statistics lesson for you. You can learn a lot more about it online. But what does that R squared value suggest then? Huh?
Gonna keep going.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to keep going, probably at the same rate. So so one of the things that we know that we're facing is a declining population in general, and a declining student population because of it. Now, if you think about this, it kind of makes sense, right? If people are leaving the area, they're taking their kids with them. That's one of the, because they're going out for jobs. That kind of makes sense. The other thing that, the millennials, which a lot of these are the parents of these new kids, they're having less children. That's, that's fact. That's something that's well known in the national research. So two things are contributing to it, which is probably explains why our student population is declining faster than our population, is it has to do with having less kids, and it has to do with people leaving the area. Now, what happens when people leave the area? They take their kids with them. Who are those people? Those are our working adults, right? And so the folks that are left are generally older or poor and can't move. And so that kind of describes or implies what our population is becoming aging. And it also implies that our population is becoming more poor. So that's important and critical. We've got a lot of poor people out there. Now, that was the other thing that I looked at in terms of the census data. The census data for the 5-county area, I looked at poverty rates. And when it comes to poverty rates, it depends on which county that you live in. But somewhere between 15% and 33%, according to the Census Bureau, of our friends, of our neighbors, are living at the poverty rate or below. Now, 15 to 33% sounds really bad. But I would like you to think about this in terms of actual numbers. If we got 53,000 residents and 15 to 33% are living at the poverty rate, we're talking about somewhere around 15 to 20,000 families. Again, our neighbors, our friends, are living at the poverty rate or below. That has to be unacceptable to us. That has to be a passion that drives us moving forward. Think about that. There are 15 to 20,000 people right now that don't know where their next meal might be coming from, that don't know if they can pay their power bill or their water bill. We have to be that light on the hill that I've talked about before. We have to be that shining example. So let's look at this high school trend a little bit more, because there was certainly some things that we have to do to improve our recruitment of high school students. Wouldn't you agree? All right, so again, I told you I started looking at this data from a PK to 12th grade perspective. And so what you see here, last year, 1920, we had in all 19 school districts, we had 587 students at pre-K level. We had 590 students kindergarten level, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And last year, in 12th grade, seniors, we had 605 students who could have potentially graduated and come to Shawnee College. Remember that 605 number. Now, there's some good news it looks like, or potentially. If you look at this number, these are this year's high school seniors, right? Because these students graduated, this shift would have moved on. So these would be this year's seniors. This is seniors in FY23. This is seniors in FY24. What do you see here? Potentially an increase. What kind of increase, though? Is it not a lot, right? Now, one of the things that, as you get closer to this end, students have dropped out of school, students have moved away, that kind of stuff. So this is really more predictive. Here, there'll still be some dropouts, there'll still be some people move away. So by the time this group gets to be seniors, it's going to be less than 670 probably. And it's probably going to be, 635, somewhere in that range. So it's not going to be as dramatic of an increase as we think it might be, but at least it's not a decrease. Right? So there is some optimism there. But two things of caution. One, what's that R squared value? Say, close to 1, close to 0. Yeah, it's close to 0. So that line's, it's all over the board. It's not predictive. That's what that's saying. But what else do we know about our high school population? We know the population's leaving, right? Anything else we know about them? What about COVID? How do you think COVID's going to impact this? Well, I've talked to 3 superintendents in the last 3 weeks. And they have all told me that they've lost enrollment this year. Massac County has lost 170 students. Dr. Price and Carroll, they've lost a high percentage of their students. They're right, they don't know for sure, but they are filling out transcript requests from Texas, from Oklahoma, from Nebraska. People may be leaving our communities at a higher rate than had been previously happening because of the COVID virus. People need jobs. They have to survive. So I think what we have to do is look at this 605 or 610 and say this is a soft number, but it's a place to start, okay? I want you to understand these are pretty accurate numbers as of 20. I think IBHE, Lisa, when they publish this list? Isn't it like in April or May or something? I think so. Whenever they get the spring counts, and they add them up and post it. So that's what our high school population looks like. Another thing that we need to understand about our high school population is this is a new generation of students. They're different than the millennial parents. These students have grown up in an age where Amazon has always existed. They've grown up in an age where they can have an app on their device, tablet, phone, whatever, and they can get a customized personal experience. I mean, my kids have Spotify. They listen to a music, they get 10 recommendations on what kind of other music they might like. They buy something on Amazon or Xbox or Live or whatever, and they get recommendations for other things that they like. They are used to that personalized experience. By and large, these students have high expectations of personalized service for everything they do. And if we can't provide personalized, and if they don't achieve that personalized service or don't receive it to their satisfaction, they go elsewhere. They're quick to go elsewhere. And so they've also grown up in a world where what has the news been telling them about higher education? It's expensive, right? Student loan debt out of control. Higher education is not relevant. So we've got some major challenges with our K12 population. I'm just sharing that with you. This is nationally. This is just not Shawnee. Any questions about this? All right, so there's all your districts. So you can see I didn't miss any. So what do you, let's talk a little bit about how this affects our finance. This last September, the board passed a budget, a college budget, that showed a $1.9 million deficit. That means that we're spending $1.9 million more than we're going to get revenue in this year. That's the anticipation. We can't continue to do that, obviously. Now, there were lots of reasons why we did that. It won't continue in the future, but we have to figure out ways to balance our budget. And so as you think about ways to balance your budget, the major thing that we can control is, and in some ways, is enrollment. Okay? Now, for enrollment, I want to talk to you give you a little bit of a lesson on how we generate revenue. Obviously, tuition revenue is and fee revenue is pretty straightforward. Everybody understands that, because you've all probably paid tuition or fees in your life at some point. So that is part of our revenue generation stream. But it's only about 40%. You know, it ebbs from year to year. But it's really only about 40% of the revenue we receive. The other revenue comes from the local tax base. I think it's roughly, you know, it gives or takes, but it's around 10%. Now, what's happening to our tax base given to the population? Declining. So our revenue probably from our local tax base is going to be, you know, pretty flat. I mean, because the value goes up every year, it gets negated because we're losing population. So it's pretty flat. So the only other revenue stream that we have is from the state. The state Illinois Community College Board manages state monies, and so we can by generating more enrollment, we can potentially generate more state revenue. So I want to explain how this works a little bit. The state reimburses us based on the types of courses that we offer. So if we have a transfer course, that's the baccalaureate transfer, that's your English, your speech, psychology, those kinds of things, all of those things that we call IAI transfer courses, they reimburse us at one rate. If we have a career tech ed, truck driving, welding, those kinds of programs, they reimburse us at a different rate. If we have health programs, those reimburse at a different rate, and so on. So these are the categories that ICCB has. Now, I wanted to know at the time, back in June, what's our student mix? What does it look like? How many students do we have in adult ed? How many students do we have in transfer courses? How many students do we have in CTE courses? Because you can kind of estimate then, because in that way you can kind of say past performance does predict a little bit of future. So if we got 24% of our students are career tech ed students, we can pretty much predict But next year, it's going to be around 20, 25%. If 50% are transfer, so on. So that's what we kind of did. The data that I had available to me that was online at the time showed from Shawnee's, what's it called, Sabrina? The data book. This showed the distribution of these kinds of students. And so what this says is we had roughly 1,900 baccalaureate transfer students in FY12. So that's fiscal FY12 is basically fall 11, spring 12. And then you can see in 13, 14, 15, 16, how that trend is going down. So I didn't have 17, 18, or 19, but it really didn't matter to me. I was just looking for kind of a rough general percentage. And so we did put all those numbers in. This percentage shows here. So roughly 26% of our students are baccalaureate transfer in FY12. The average over the year is 25%. So you can see as you start to add more data to it, you start to see what the average kind of looks like. Now the reason I did that is because I wanted to figure out how much money we could get from ICCB given how many students that we might have. And so we're just kind of an estimate, it's a projection. For last year, or actually, this might be this year's actual reimbursement rate. I can't remember if it was 19 or 20. This is how the state is paying. So of those 25% baccalaureate transfer students, we're getting $30.46 from the state for every credit hour that we generate. For the 51% that are voc skills, we're getting, depends on the voc skill, I guess this could be technical or business, but somewhere around $40 a credit hour. So what I did then is I looked at all of these. This is our tuition. This is a revenue stream. That's what our current tuition rate is. This is what our technology fee is. I averaged these rates and got roughly $40 an hour. So roughly for every credit hour we can generate, we can get $180, assuming that it's not dual credit. So if you think about every credit hour that we generate, we get $180. How many $180 do we need to overcome the $1.9 million budget deficit? That's what we did. What it came out to is we need about 11,000 new credit hours. New credit hours. That's key. 11,000 new credit hours. This was based off of a budget that assumed 30,000 credit hours this year. 29 actually, so that's why it's 11. Brandy's looked at these numbers. Her budget estimate says that we would break even at 40,000 credit hours. We're not going to even get to 29 this year, but that's what we need. So this, I'm pretty confident this is a really good estimate. So we need 11,000 new credit hours over and above what we are currently generating. So then, if you know what you need to generate from a credit hour perspective, then you can kind of reverse engineer and figure out how many students you need to get to there. New students that you need to get there. So I kind of looked at it this way. Now we know students don't always take full loads. A lot of our students come here, they take one class. That's 3 hours on average. Some students take 6, some 9, some will take 12. Not many take 15, but they could. And you know, very, very few take 18 or more. So you have to kind of look at it on these new students. What does their average credit load look like? Now, at the time, I didn't know that answer. I really still don't know that answer today. But you can kind of forecast what it would look like if we knew the answer. If a student took 14 hours, and we use this same distribution, these percentages, how many new students would we need? What's that, Celia? How many? 700. Now, 14 credit hours in a year is 7 a semester, right? Or some combination of spring, summer, fall. 14 credit hours. We need 793 students. Now, wait a minute. 793 students at 7. How many high school students did we have last year? What's that tell you? What's that tell you?
Gonna have to look at non-grad.
We're going to have to look at some non-traditional students. We cannot balance our budget on the backs of high school students. All of the efforts and energy we're putting into recruiting high school students is important, but it's not going to be enough to save us. We have to look at engaging the rest of our population. So when you hear us talk about things, we're not dismissing recruiting high school. We're just saying we need to do more than that. We need to do more than that, clearly. Now, I think we can do a little bit better with our high school students. Don't get me wrong. I don't know what, in higher education, in analytics, they have this indicator called market penetration rate. And market penetration rate is looking at those numbers of high school seniors that graduated, that 605, how many of those 605 actually attended after graduation Shawnee Community College in the fall. I really don't know what our market penetration rate is yet. Now, we've got some data that suggests market penetration rate from dual credit students, but we don't know the total percentage. Nationwide, in my history in working in higher education, suggests that community colleges in generally attract about 20 to 25% of the high school graduates into their college. 20, 25% was roughly 6 out of 600, about 200 roughly, a little less, 178, somewhere around there. But I think Shawnee's doing, smaller community colleges in particular tend to do better. I think Shawnee's probably, if I had to guess, I'd say we're probably around 30, maybe 35, maybe 40. The lower we're actually doing now, the more opportunity we have to improve, which would be better for us. But I could also tell you, though, that some of the best community colleges in the nation, 50% is kind of the top end of that. 60, maybe 70%. We actually did a couple 70% up in Fairfield with Fairfield High School. But 70% then is still, out of 600, still not enough. So again, we really need to focus on helping our students in the non-traditional areas. So what does that mean? That means programs that are offered outside of the normal schedules. Programs that are offered more than just Monday, Wednesday, from 9 to noon. Because our millennial students that are still here are likely still working. So we're going to have to look at maybe doing some evening classes. Now, challenges that working adults will have is travel, right? Coming to the college from work, making sure their kids are fed, making sure their kids have babysitting, all that good stuff. That's all the more reason that we really need to look at providing courses to them out in their communities near their homes. So people have said to me and time again, early on, and I was listening to it, we need to close the extension centers. That's what I've heard. They're expensive. That may be true, but then I think we limit our abilities to attract adult students. And so I'm resisting that right now. I think it's important that we have to have places available for our adults to take classes. We also have to have the classes that they need and want to be successful. So I think it also suggests things like short-term training, short-term certificates, because they don't want to invest their time. And these families are poor. They don't have time to wait for a 2-year degree, hoping a course will come around every 6 months. We have to give them shorter-term things that lead to jobs that help them break their poverty. You can see the numbers get better, if we can also convince students to take more courses a semester. So there's some of that as part of our strategies moving forward. Going from 14 to 20 credits. So if we can get a student to take 20 credits in a year, that number jumps down to 555. If we can somehow get students to take 30 credit hours in a year, which is doable, 12, 12, and 3, 12 fall, 12 spring, 3 in the summer. Well, 6, I guess, summer, once I do my math right. It's still possible, but it's not likely. we could get that number down to 370. So if we can put strategies in place to help students get enrolled, stay enrolled, not drop out, then we'll also help. So as we move forward in the future, this spring, we are revisiting the college's strategic plan. We're not redoing it, we're looking at it, we're going to revise it, and we're going to really concentrate on those kinds of objectives that we've already identified that will allow us to, A, recruit our high schools better, B, recruit our non-traditional population better, and C, focus on retaining those students. We're going to build some accountability in there. We're going to use some data and some analytics to provide some measures for that, and I'm going to present that to the board in March. But to get to that point, I'll be working with you all and kind of asking you what you think that we need to do. This plan cannot, like I said at the very beginning, I cannot solve it by myself. I need each and every one of you to think about what you can do, what Rick can do to help us with this. One of the things that we have to do is provide a realistic plan. We're not ever going to have the resources to have all the shiny things that you see. What is realistic and what we can do is provide the best, most personalized customer service to these students that we possibly can. We can do that. We actually are in an advantageous position to do that because we are small. That is one of the strengths of us being small is we can pivot, we can change quickly, and we can make things happen. Whereas at other larger colleges, they'd still be debating stuff for 2 years. We don't need to do that. We know what we need to do. I am challenging you as individuals and everyone watching this to do some research. Find out what are some things that you need to do, that you could do, that you would like to do to provide better customer service to our students. And when I get around to meeting with you in the spring, you bring those ideas to the table and we figure out ways to resource them. That's the plan moving forward. And I would appreciate everything that you guys can do to help contribute to that. With that, I'll be glad to answer questions. And other than that, we're going to have a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and enjoy our families over the holidays.
I don't have a question, but that was a very informative presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I believe everything you said is spot on.